All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Adam here with me. I'm super excited to have this conversation. He probably knows more about more things than most people I've had on the podcast. So
Oh,
thanks so much for doing this.
oh, cool. And bang, bang to your back. That's awesome.
Let's get into your background. Maybe give us an
Well,
overview of kind of how we get to you today, running a family office and building
yeah,
companies so people understand your perspective.
well, and let me clarify, I don't run a family office. I run my own family office, and there's quite a difference between the two. Um, I have all my own capacity. I do lease other people's capacity, other family office capacity. And I am a part of the syndicate because there is benefits to having our own kind of angel list operation, as well as back office. Um, as well as collaborating on certain things, which is great. Family offices these days are a little bit different than they used to be because they've had to take in a lot of outside money. So that kind of constrains them in more philosophically. It'll kind of give a deviation to what one person wants to do with their money is now you have to kind of reach a consensus and making money is not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. So I'll give you a little bit of my own background. Um, and if, I appreciate you saying that I might have a more kind of robust um, system of view and background information than a lot of your guests. And now I feel kind of challenged by that because I feel like that, I feel like Kasparov or now Magnus, where I just want to have like 30 chess games going on at once and then play them kind of all at the same time and then, win. I think that's awesome. I want to do that. That's like a real mental challenge. I want to do that now. I'll take 30 of your guests and we'll go from subject to subject. And I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. So let me go backwards and I'll give you my own history. And I know we were discussing a little bit of this in advance. Um, oh, that's interesting. That might be our delivery. Which is late, by the way, which is actually kind of aggravating. So I came out of Wall Street. And let me actually start even before that. I knew from the time I was probably 5 that I wanted to work in finance. I knew that I wanted to be successful. And then as the years go by, actually, I didn't know that I wanted to be in finance. I knew that I had a picture of myself and it just needed to get more crystallized. So I had kind of like this crystal ball, but it was kind of very blurry and kind of like as a kid, it was already kind of in its most disturbed. I had one of those snow crystals and as a kid, it was in its most kind of disturbed state where you can just kind of see just enough of the Christmas tree to maybe you can see the green of it. And that was it. And then as the years went on, I think by the time I was around 12 or 13, I had it pretty figured out. I mean, to the T, I had it figured out. I knew I wanted to work in finance at that time. I was very intrigued by it, not because of kind of my own intellectual pursuits, because they really weren't finance, but it was kind of a means to an end. And I knew I had that I've been blessed with certain things that I needed to kind of turn into a more durable currency, right? Even as a kid. So I spent, it kept on getting clearer and clearer. I wasn't particularly, I went to French seminary. I went to PS41. I went to St. Anne. So I went to some great schools. My family was very lower middle class, but those schools were very affordable at that time. And I had a whole stack of books as a kid, so everywhere I went. I think the largest stack was probably in the bathroom. So when I was in school, I already knew what I wanted to do. But in school, you can't really, when you're in 5th grade, you can't really pick and choose. I knew I loved history, but my history was just too brief what was occurring. So I spent a lot of time in the library. I couldn't care about math in the way it was being presented to me, which was arithmetic, was something a kid can just pick up on their own. Honestly, as long as they have that kind of construct, um, that desire. If there's a reason for them to add two and two, they can figure it out really quickly for themselves. The same is true with geometry. Uh, but I didn't see any reason for calculus, and I didn't see any reason for a lot of the places where I was spending my time. I was very intrigued by language, so I did manage to flunk language time after time. I finished school as much as I could endure. Then I enrolled in college just as everybody else does. I hated college because I felt that I already knew what I wanted to do, and this just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I was interacting with kids that definitely didn't know what they wanted to do, and it was a distraction because I've never gotten high. I've never, it's just not my thing. And I felt that they were interfering, even though they were my friends. So I felt I was biding my time to go to Wall Street. And then when I was about 19 years old, um, I knew that I was ready. I was working in a retail job at that time in Manhattan. I was working at a record store. Actually, I was working at the Gap. I went from job to job at that time because I wasn't particularly interested, but I knew I needed to bide my time. So from the time I was 17 years old, I was biding my time. I wound up, back then, Wall Street was much more approachable than it is now, and kind of the big people, the Jamie Dimons and everybody else were much more accessible. I mean, you could just give them a call out of the blue. And that is what I did. I'm a very firm believer in cold calling, that it kind of optimizes the path from A to Z. So that's what I did. And I cold my way into Goldman Sachs, and I cold my way into Vunta. I cold my way into several firms, many of which didn't have interest in me, which was fine. I wasn't particularly insulted by that, and everybody was very kind, telling me why they didn't have interest in me. And a lot of the reason that they didn't have interest in me was they wanted somebody that could hit the ground running and just get revenue positive, and I certainly couldn't do that. Or they wanted somebody to fill a very niche role, which was more than just a broker or an analyst or this or that. But even within that, they wanted a smaller sliver. I wasn't interested in it. So I wound up meeting with, I wound up really having a great relationship with two analysts from different firms. One of them is a Goldman Sachs, and he was essentially the analyst that discovered Microsoft, Bell, Lotus Suite. And the other one essentially discovered Micron and the semiconductor side of it. I went to semiconductor side of it. I did very well. I did very well by accident. He loved me and they loved me and they embraced me, and I did incredibly well. I was just very lucky, the right person at the right time, and I had the right gifts. My mentor there quit, and he left me at that time the largest position in Micron on Wall Street. So I had to become smart very quickly, and that required learning what a short squeeze is and participating in one. And I became part of the Short Busters Club, where we squeezed other shorts such as Conseco, the Ray Dirk Short Busters Club, which was kind of famous at that time. I then left that firm for a wanderlust, and was offered a lot of money to go to Wirehouse. And I went there. I had the largest position in Micron, VLSI, and a whole bunch of other things, which put a lot of risk on their plate. So I started my own shop. I did an investment bank. I did several, mostly within semiconductors and acquisition. One of them was the acquisition of Zeos, which became Micron Electronics, and which became Micron and Micron Electronics. And that itself was just amazing. And I started a research shop. And 2 years later, I knew I was going to sell it. And 2 years later, I sold it. And at that time, I thought I was important because I sold it for over $20 million. I was just a kid. And back then, there was actually a lot of money. And I was already one of the big producers on Wall Street. So I didn't want to go back I know what pattern recognition is, and I try and avoid it, and that can be a very bad thing. Um, so I I took 2 years off. My wife and I traveled all over the place, and when I came back, Silicon Alley was just beginning, which is in Manhattan, was just beginning, and About.com and Tripod and Fred Wilson at that time was still at Chase Capital Partners, and there was Milestone Ventures, and there was just a different venture capital world. There was different companies. They called it Internet 1.0, which was, I knew was ridiculous at the time. Um, but nevertheless, I invested in a lot of those companies, and many of them got acquired. Some of them were just interesting to observe, such as pseudo programs, which did, and I watched broadcast.com initiate and become successful. And as those positions were sold off, um, I didn't want to do that again either. I had done kind of the investment route within that, and done kind of what I would think of as a real estate speculator I did by funding a lot of those companies out of my own pocket and not even bothering going through a VC and giving them big. And I just went on every cap table there was, including some of the losers, Cosmo.com, and a whole bunch of them. So after I cashed those positions and after pseudo programs had basically been in its death throes, and Josh had gone, a bit off the wall, I saw what one of the gapping needs within that industry was, which is these companies back then, you might be a little bit too young for it, but were growing from 2 employees or 10 employees to 400. And this would happen so quickly that they didn't build up the internal capacity, the human resources capacity, which exposed them to a lot of risk. So one of the things that was happening is these companies were being acquired, or considering even being acquired, taking VC dollars, was they had holes in their financial books, which usually involved a little bit of other problems as well. And they also had a lot of exposure to lawsuits. Everybody on their way out was suing for sexual harassment and other things. And not to say that cases didn't have merit, but usually it's done to increase a severance package, or when a company is looking to obtain venture capital, particularly back then, it was done as a mechanism of almost extortion, that they're going to obstruct in the venture capital round with any claims. So they would embellish something that was already probably a problem. And the companies were making themselves very vulnerable to that because they were doing horrible things. So I don't want to assign guilt to one party and diminish it to the other. So I decided to invest in, I had made an investment in a company called, at that time, Administaff. And it was a small investment, it was $50,000. So that was around 19, that was when I still had my own research shop, my own brokerage firm. And so this is maybe 1995. It was a $50,000 investment that was introduced to me from a Methodist minister, of all things, who I'm not Methodist, and it was the Texas environment at that time was really becoming very entrepreneurial, which was really remarkable to watch. I think we're seeing a resurgence of it now. So Administaff did really well. I think it's worth, I haven't looked, I don't pay attention to these things anymore, but last time I saw a few years ago was $2 billion, and the stock is done well more than double that, and I still have a very large position. At one time I owned 5% of the company. And when I owned 5% of the company, you either have, I went over to become sales over there, which was incredible. It was really great. But I didn't really need the money, and I was just extraordinarily successful. But I also own 5% of the company. And when you're in that position, you can either be an investor or you can be an employee. You can't really be both. And even though the founder was a good friend of mine and a mentor, it compromised our relationship to the point it still hasn't recovered. You can't be both. And the stock, because I knew so much about short squeezing, in 2001, during the Internet 1.0 bust, the stock went from $20 to $2. And this is a New York Stock Exchange listed company that went public to Morgan, so that's really unheard of. And there was a lot of things that drove that, and a lot of those things that drove it were wrong. In 2006, the stock was now trading at 60. So I did well. I'm going to knock on something, but I don't have wood available. I have my chair, so I'll knock on ceramic. Either way, the spirit of appreciation is with whatever I knock on. So, I cashed out somewhat. It's hard to cash out of that large of a position. And I became investors in a private equity firm. Administaff was the earliest PEO, professional employee organization, if you're familiar with what that is. They had created that modern industry. They did all the lobbying. They literally just created it. What's now kind of an accepted norm within the tech industry and everything else. So they created it. They were the premium and still are the tier AAA plus player. A private equity firm asked me to put in $3 million. Put it in. They said that we want to build our own PO. They were clients of mine, actually at Untistaff, which is now called Insperity. They were clients of mine, and I love them. And they said we want to do the same thing. So we acquired a stake. We bought out the position from Bessemer, which was having big cash problems at the time. It's a great venture capital firm. It was just a perfect storm that hit them. And sometimes when a venture capital firm is too successful, it also means you have to give people's money back. They just want to cash out, and that can cause its own problems. It's just crazy, but it is what it is. A lot of big investors, and now myself included, sometimes we want to take money off. So we bought a position in a company called Trinet. Then we bought another position in a publicly traded company that was called Jeopardy, which was trading around $2 a share. That company had a 75, which is a PEO, professional employee organization. That company had a $75 million cash in the bank, or that was due to it because of a rebate from their worker comp of the business. And the acquisition cost us $100 million. So it was good. Two companies were blended. The private equity firm took a lot of ownership of the whole thing beyond just that. In this case, it was General Atlantic Partners. And one of the remarkable things about General Atlantic Partners, Sequoia, where I'm still, they've been great to me, and NEA, which is the same, and Scott Sandel's group and everybody, and is that General Atlantic, Sequoia, NEA, in their industries are the most durable currency. So they're the American dollar. They're the most durable currency. If General Atlantic's going to commit $200 million, they're also going to commit $2 billion. So they committed $2 billion. We made a lot of acquisitions. Trinet now is kind of the norm for everybody. I had a very large position in that, very large. And the company went public in 2012. And in 2012, another one of my early investments went public, which was called Workday, which is now kind of the norm also. And it was founded by the guys who had done PeopleSoft, and before that, PeopleSoft was going to be acquired by Oracle. These are industries I know really well. So end of the day, in 2012, I had done really well in all my careers. And I decided to make a lot of venture capital investments. I think I did $1 million deal on AngelList when it was still oriented towards private wealth. Now it's all retail, so I don't really have an appetite for it. That didn't work out, but I was very intrigued in that formula, so I decided to create a family office syndicate. So I took my own family office, which I had just built, and decided to create a syndicate. And the first deal we did was a company that I was already a very early investor in. It was doing well, called Xerox, which is an Australian company. That was an accounting company, and it kind of was a technological substituent for Lotus or whatever, QuickBooks, which also did incredibly well. So we took down, it was a $110 million deal that was done through Excel. I think we took down 3 of that. I don't recall anymore. It was 2012. But it worked so well that I decided to do others. I decided to do Slack, where the venture capitalists would have a good deal, but sometimes firms don't want to take venture capital money for their own reason, or they want to bring in other investors for their own reason, particularly back then. Uh, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but particularly back then, so I cold called it to them, did well. Um, and I was so familiar with the industry that, back then in 2012, I was telling everybody to get out of Zenefits and that it was essentially a criminal enterprise. And whatever you think of Andreessen, which is, I'm not a critic of his at all. I'm definitely not. Man's a genius. Created much of what we have now. Well, certainly didn't create it, but gave it a language and put things into the vernacular that are now just part of it. So took down Slack, took down Box, took down a whole bunch of deals, worked out incredible. And it just became, I knew it was going to be super successful. So we just kept on building up the family office syndicate. And initially I brought in a lot of overseas money because American family offices at that time were not interested in that. They wanted to do different types of deals. They wanted to take down bonds and, maybe invest $1 million here and $1 million there. But the industry didn't really exist at that time. So I spent probably 2 years traveling all over the Middle East and here and there, including China at that time. Meeting a lot of analysts with family offices, meeting a lot of family offices, and I showed them what I had done with myself and 1 or 2 other family offices and how we did it, and everybody loved it. These guys have a lot of them, just staggering. And they said, okay, we'll commit $100 or $200 million to this, and we'll match everything that you want to do within that niche, because these guys are also doing billion-dollar agricultural deals where they're buying smelting plants that have contracts going forward 10 years. It's ridiculous. So, that worked out really well, and it's still now such a big part of my life. And, I think I've guided it as kind of a futurist somewhat. So after I cashed out the somewhat of China and Workday, and I wanted to figure out what would happen next. And I got very intrigued in the gig economy and wrote up a lot about the gig economy and just became probably the best guy on the street who understood it. But because I wanted to replicate the co-employment relationship in China, didn't find a lot of gig economies I thought could sustain, because all my companies have always been profitable. Wasn't particularly interested in some guy with a dream that went public and it's still a dream. It's just not what I do. I sleep at night like a baby, and I'm not trying to rob anybody or have them lie or participate in some type of a collusion. All my companies are profitable. So made a couple of small investments. Personally, I think I gave a bunch of people $50,000 just to speculate. I learned that I don't really like people. I like companies. There's a big difference. People bullshit. Companies don't. I can see something. My Rolodex is incredible. So I didn't want to squander that on somebody who might inadvertently misrepresent things or couldn't change with the wind. I was very early involved in a company called Kazaa. And the remarkable thing about that company is the management and the actual chairman and a few other people, I watched how they were able to move. As things changed, they moved. It was really incredible, including TransferWise. I've seen some people really move. I was in Skype and I've just seen people move. So I've seen real entrepreneurs, and I've seen those entrepreneurs who have succeeded becoming entrepreneurs they went from being conquerors to administrators incredibly. So I did well with Skype also. I guess I should include that in TransferWise. So now I've got my family office. And a lot of our investment thesis now is what goes forward. I've had a large position in Tesla since the very early days. I've had a large position in Facebook since the very early days. And that started off just opportunistically when stock went down to 18. I met Zuckerberg on the roadshow. Knew the guy is Alexander the Great. Forget about it. Just remarkable, very honest, very sincere. I still think about it to this day when I compare him to some of the other social media companies and to some of the other tech people, the difference between him and when Twitter came to my office to do the roadshow and to soak up shares for the aftermarket, I had in that room the old Goldman Sachs bull stock, who are friends, and we've invested just tens of millions of dollars together at that time. So, but I didn't introduce him by that. You know, the old people guy, whatever. Nevertheless, I thought the Twitter guys were very brash. We said, well, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? And they felt they had a solution because that they didn't need to express to us because they were too smart and they were wrong with everything. While Mark Zuckerberg was very responsive. So now my thesis is jumping to now. About 3 years ago, I started investing in defense industry companies. There's a lot of reasons for it, but a lot of my thesis is the world's just going to go to war. I don't like it, but you don't have nuclear weapons just as a threat. You don't develop micronuclears, which are incredible technology. America should really develop it. But you don't have these little mini nukes just as reactors. And the world was going to go to war. I wound up having large positions bearish against China. And it started out as that because I said, well, who is going to be part of this war? And I speak Mandarin, and I've been there about 20 times, and I know the culture there really well. And I saw what was happening along the South China Seas. So I said, there's going to be a war. I couldn't tell you where it was going to be and who was going to be on it and what properties they were going to have and what ports they were going to use and what port and how it was working out. So I also saw them infiltrating American agriculture. So I took large positions bullish on pigs, and I don't eat them. And I love them, but I have to deal with reality. There are people who eat such things, and I knew China was going to experience a shortage. I didn't expect it to be as severe as it was, and as it became more severe, I increased my positions in countries around the world where I took physical inventories of pens and a whole bunch of other things in roadways, along with actually some of our family office syndicate people who could really lay down the cash.
And I guess, Adam, one of the things that's really interesting to me is you come out of a world that I'll describe as kind of Wall Street heavy, right? In terms of very finance driven, very much kind of public markets. But you found a lot of success in investing in these private companies in more of a venture capital model.
Yeah.
Today, you have a family office that's highly successful. You're able to have both public, private investments. In the public markets, you have taken very large positions in Tesla, Boeing, Lockheed, right? Kind of like you're describing what I would put in the category of like innovation and also
defense. That's what they are. That's right. Exactly what they are.
So you've got kind of these two buckets of innovation, and you've got defense, but
defense is innovation.
Of course.
Defense innovation is what was the armies that won because of their innovation.
Of course. Well, and I guess what is the surprising part, right? And I'm cheating because you and I have talked about this before, and you've kind of described some of it, is in that innovation bucket, defense is kind of a subset of it. You also have things like Tesla, which obviously has kind of taken the lead on the electric vehicle side, but you don't have exposure to Amazon. And I think you've got a very unique view of why you've chosen to not take a position in Amazon. So maybe talk through a little bit of the logic behind, because I think when people hear somebody who's been successful over and over and over again, they wonder, well, what are you not bullish on?
I've lost money also.
Of course. So maybe talk a little bit about Amazon and kind of what the thesis there was to actually avoid investing.
Well, let me go backwards a little bit then to give you some context on Amazon, and also to be a little bit more responsive to the innovation in the defense industry and Tesla as well. So, part of my thesis was how expensive innovation is in the United States. And I'm not talking about Facebook coming out with an app or Google doing some AI, because I don't mean to knock any of the people that are doing that, but that's low-hanging fruit. That's still really, Facebook training it to read memes, or so they can take out hate whatever, or to inform robotic systems is actually simple stuff. I don't mean to be an ass about it, but it's in that it's low-hanging fruit. Uh, Innovation in the United States, it's high-hanging fruit, is extraordinarily expensive. You need really big teams. So quantum computing is also something I've been interested in. You need teleportation communication. These are really high-hanging. You need 50 people, and you're not going to have them working remotely. You need 50 people, and you've got to have proximity to them. You've got to forget about looking over their shoulders. That's not how you measure their performance. It's highly complex. I mean, you're not getting these people for $150,000 a year and 0.5% of equity. A lot of it is also spinning out of the NSA, where they're like, listen, we don't have the internal bandwidth to be able to do this, and we don't have an org chart that permits it. And I became an investor in a lot of those companies because you'll say, listen, we have a couple of cryptologists and we're interested in doing this, but the general that's currently the CEO of this venture within the NSA has no idea what he's doing, and he's kind of an ass, and nobody likes him. And we can't allocate any more internal resources like recruiting or anything else or staff. So they would spin it out, and I would give them usually $2 million per. And these companies don't go from seed to B round. They basically go from seed. Well, I'd say they go from A, where they just suck up a lot of smart money. They don't want to take in venture capital money. They've taken a lot of Zuckerberg Chang, who came in there really early, taken a lot of Bloomberg, taken in a lot of InQtel. But those are passive investors. Zuckerberg Chang isn't going to touch anything. And InQtel isn't going to touch anything. So, you need to scale these companies. So you can see how expensive innovation is, because as those companies go from seed to C overnight, you now see the problems they're trying to solve. It's ridiculous. When you see the defense industry, you see the F-35, and you see some of these other things, or the Apache 64s, these are highly complex problems. When you have an understanding that the world is going to have 1,000 drones lighting up the sky or darkening the sky, and one of them is going to have a payload that's a biological weapon that some kid created in his genome lab, finding that 1 out of 1,000 is not a couple of kids in their basement writing code. Highly complex problems. And then you've also got problems of data, how to identify which is the friend or which is the foe, because what happens if you've got 1,000 drones, one of them has got this huge payload, and it's following a couple of 747s. What do you do then? If you take out one, you're going to take out the friend also. And what if you don't know if that passenger plane is friend or foe? And how do you resolve? There's just so much complex, really highly complex. And that's also true with Tesla. I don't think of Tesla as an oil company. I never did. One of their largest shareholders was a good friend. And in fact, in one of the old Goldman Sachs All-Stars. And I persuaded him into Facebook, I think at $60 or something. And maybe 2013 or so. He persuaded me to increase positions in Tesla. And he kind of gave me a real roadmap of what it is. Elon also used to come to the Sequoia annual LP meetings a lot, so I had a chance to speak with him. It's not an auto company. Just as Amazon is not a book seller. It's just not. If you have a concept of anything clean and what happens, you've got to build up the back end for that. And so that's what I think they're building up. Kind of, I think about it more as a back end that's doing not just the fulfillment of it, but also all the reconciliation that's required to make this thing work. And because those existing pieces weren't there, they had to build them. It's incredible. I mean, it's just remarkable. Now with SpaceX, you couldn't do that until recently. The United States couldn't do what they're doing. India could do a little bit of what they were doing. It's just ridiculous. So now going forward to Amazon. Amazon is not really solving highly complex problems. There's not really a lot of innovation. I know there's a lot of entrepreneurial myth to them that's been adopted by a lot of Wall Street, a lot of tech kids, because Amazon is doing first world propaganda. They're very good at it. And I literally mean first world propaganda. They're doing American style propaganda. So they've got a lot of embedded journalists, from Biz Insider and such, that are out there. My cat just turned on the light. So their accomplishment is really seizing the opportunity for greed within our own Congress, within our own political establishment, and also fulfilling kind of an oligarch wish list. So he saw where the world was going, and he just built that for them. So he saw that in actuality, the world was no longer fragmented, right? The fragmenting had occurred in my generation, which was all the big conglomerates started spinning things off. Everything they bought in the 80s, so to speak, waste management companies and everything, they now started spinning off, and that's what Mike Milken was doing. He was giving them liquidity, spin off, and a whole bunch of that stuff. So Jeff is doing the exact opposite. He's defragmenting, and he's doing it in the form of a monopsony. But monopsony has always become monopoly. And in doing what he's doing, he's just creating absolute destruction. But that's what our power structure now demands. It's no longer just an issue of shareholder return. It's malicious.
How do you balance the idea between a company like Amazon, which has been one of the best performing stocks, and
I don't know it. Yeah,
but has
a lot of luck.
when you measure it from like a innovative product and revenue generation standpoint, it has been quote unquote productive. But to your point, by them being productive and successful, you're basically making the argument that they're causing destruction in the rest of the market, right? So kind of how do you balance those on like a net basis, and how do you just think of it from a mental framework standpoint?
So around, I don't even know what year I decided to not buy the stock. But I knew it was going to increase manyfold, but I didn't want to be complicit in what it was doing. While as, defense industry, well, those bombs have to drop somewhere, right? And those planes are going to shoot at something. There's also so much innovation that's going on that if we don't innovate, then our opponents will drop their bombs on us because they're going to. And if we're going to have a space force, we need to create the technology that can facilitate that. But so Amazon, their innovation is more into propaganda and how they've been able to kind of establish a foothold. I mean, a lot of what made them great, so to speak, was the acquisition of AWS. And those margins really started eroding when Azure came into the marketplace and sucked up a lot of shares. So it's a very complex story with Amazon because Amazon is not a company, it's a country. To think about it as a company is unpersuasive. It is, my thesis has always been that, or since I was about 15, I suppose, that sovereignty is changing. And even then I could see evidence of it, that we were going from a territorial sovereignty to a functional sovereignty. And you could see that more with what Amazon is doing and what Facebook and Google is doing. So right now people are protesting and they're rioting, right? People are doing very harmful things, but they're also doing fantastic things out there. But the destructive part of it, which is the bad part of it, is they're tearing down what is available to them. They're tearing down the merchant on the street because they cannot tear down Amazon. Amazon does not have those physical locations that they can rip down. They've got some data centers, which if they even decide to approach, they'll get shot down and you'll never hear about it on CNN. Guaranteed. Same with Facebook. It's not laying off a lot of people, but it's a first world country. I didn't want to participate in that, but I saw it happen. So I saw the world defragmenting, and I saw the idea of sovereignty really changing over, and now people are seeing it. And in a year or two, it's not even going to be, you'll be just as happy to exchange Amazon credits as you are the American dollar for some people. If you can pay your rent in Facebook coin, F coin, or Amazon coin, and your landlord accepts it, uh, what distinguishes the two? Uh,
And so I guess as part of that, there's a lot of people who listen who are huge believers in Bitcoin specifically, and kind of the digitization of
yeah.
money and all these things. How do you kind of think through the corporates entering into the currency competition, the sovereign nations digitizing their currencies, and then kind of these separation of state and money, something like a Bitcoin?
Okay, so let me go back to my own background with Bitcoin. So I was involved in a company called Kazan, which was a very early peer-to-peer, right? So there was Napster, there was LimeWire, there was Kazaa. And without getting too much in depth into Kazaa, uh, I I saw Hillary Rosen go on to the RIAA, the Recording Artists Institute, and I saw them use Metallica as this front, whatever. But Hillary Rosen just destroyed that industry because government cannot catch up, legislation cannot catch up with technology, so they have to destroy it. Um, and then they have to take ownership of it, which is what's happening with Facebook now. You know, they had to destroy. Now what they're rebuilding is, you know, this horrible incarnation. So when Kazaa got shut down, uh, I I still am resentful. I became very anti-status, and when Bitcoin came out, I freaking loved it because we didn't have torrenting and we didn't have BitTorrenting. We had, I think it was called like eGold. We had some equivalents of that had double printing problems and a whole bunch of stuff. And then, you know, the idea of Bitcoin comes out, and I still love it. I'm no longer an owner of any. I think I may have still some Litecoin, but I met the Zcoin guys, and the Z guys. They were introducing me to Johns Hopkins, and I owned a little bit of that. I've all cashed out, but I love it. It's just not for me. It's not my risk appetite, but it is the future that we're going to live in. So if you were to ask me how that is a part of my thesis, I would say, well, there's going to be two types of money going forward. And I think you've met W. Watt, who's just off the charts, brilliant with this, and can really communicate these things better than I can. And I think we're on opposing sides in terms of what that is, but we're both on the exact same side of that's what it's going to be. She just looks for an opportunity this way, and so it's going to be poor people's money and rich people's money, essentially. Rich people's money is going to be gold, as we discussed before, buried in the backyard, and it's going to be the American dollar. And poor people's money is going to be these tertiary, secondary, and tertiary type of coins, assuming that there's going to be a Fed coin, which will be a dollar for dollar swap, and you're not going to see, you know, it's going to trade as the dollar would. So you're going to see the Fed coin very soon, I'm sure, and then whoever becomes president next will probably be a part of that. If Trump or whoever, it doesn't matter. So it's going to be poor people's money and rich people's money, because for an average middle class person, middle class, whether they get paid in script, essentially, as long as they can go to the company store and use it for purchases. Now the handicap there is that you can't buy Montana property in Montana with it. You can't buy your house in Hawaii. Will that person perhaps take it? Yeah, but when you're talking about $100 million piece of property, it's not going to be ever sticky for them. They want American dollars. They want it buried in their backyard, and they want it kept to that premium. So it's good. I mean, I cashed out. I'm still an investor in some funds that happen.
And what's interesting to me, as we've talked more and more, is you're very knowledgeable when it comes to kind of the direction that a lot of this is playing out. You understand the players in the market, but you are one of the rare people who crosses over, and you're still a very bullish person when it comes to natural commodities as well, right?
I'm bullish on America.
Of course, but I think that there's a lot of people, or at least there's a narrative that is emerging where there's a lot of people who are trying to draw a line in the sand between kind of the digital commodities, if you will, all of these new tokens and assets, and then the legacy commodities, right? So like gold versus Bitcoin is a very easy one, and you can kind of go through all of them. But you are
it's easy to kind of on a spreadsheet, perhaps kind of have a column A and a column B, and you can be very selective about what you're going to include within those fields. But it's not one. It's a kind of a reckless comparison. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so maybe talk a little bit about what you've done in the natural commodity space, and kind of what the thesis there is.
Yeah. So I, for full disclosure, I have physical inventory of gold. I've tried other metals, but they're heavy, and you have to even just holding them, is expensive in itself. And it's not an issue of having an appetite for risk. It's you've got to pay for that risk, so it kind of affects the yield on it. So in terms of gold, that just goes into kind of this idea of rich people's money and poor people's money. And gold is something you can bury in your backyard. So I don't see it being a lot of transactions with it. I don't see it displacing the dollar or anything else. I see our political and business elites just with their own Fort Knoxes, and particularly money that's being illegally transferred overseas. That's a big problem. So I also have physical. So I'm in terms of America, I'm raging bull. Just have been for 30 years. And I never sold Tesla when I had some of the top shorts on TV calling me up saying, would you please sell it because it's going to crash. And it was a 300, it crashed to 200. I knew there was going to be a short squeeze because I'm that guy that has done it before. So I expect wars. I expect these things to happen. It's part of my investment in the defense industry. And then I speak Mandarin. I have a very deep familiarity with China. And I said, if I'm going to expect a war, where is it going to happen? It's not going to happen in America, we've got two oceans and we're just blessed geographically. And we don't have, even with our divisions now, we don't have what's required to engage in a war, or certainly not to be attacked. And, it's very evident it was going to be China. I mean, just very evident what they were building out, and then just kind of the vulnerabilities of the South China Sea and their belligerence in the South China Sea. And because I was so interested in defense, what they were doing, their own defense technology, their own particularly encryption technology, which I think America's going to learn about pretty soon, but what they were doing with things I was very interested in. So then I asked my analysts to go a few clicks deeper, and we saw how we could kind of exploit that and use it as an opportunity. One was to go bearish on why. And we held those positions while other offices, family offices, and hedge funds didn't. But I don't have the investors. I don't have 20 investors, and I have to take their angry calls. It didn't really matter to me. I knew I wasn't going to lose everything, but I had, if I do, I have 3 people to call and say, hey, you're not going to, maybe don't buy that car tomorrow, right? So, and I don't have exposure of fiduciary type of thing other than to myself. So the bearish positions on the wand, which is done, right? And I also asked my analysts where there was kind of vulnerabilities within the supply chains and within the other things that kind of express themselves and lead to wars, actually. And, we were, after the Smithfield purchase, which was this, big pork company that was acquired by the Chinese and infiltrated by the Chinese, I saw what their, what my analysts actually saw what their shortages were occurring, why, and then we got 2 clicks deeper into their own corruption of their land and their water, which is probably forevermore going to be irreparable, but how they needed to kind of import certain things. And they've got 1.4 billion people to feed, and there's a lot of things going on. So overseas, I acquired, inventories with other family offices, actually, as these things can be complex. And that held those positions, and then, swine flu happened. And I think we had, and we called up a lot of other family offices, we called up a lot of hedge funds, and we said, hey, look, China is depleting their reserve. They're going to have to go overseas to go to Africa and go to other countries and bribe the people to, bribe the presidents or the prime ministers to empty their reserves and transport them to China. So that's going to be paid for in gold, right? You're not going to pay for that in Bitcoin. So, you know, I believe in hoarding the metals. I'm not a gold buyer, but you have to, because wealth is now, the concept of wealth has changed forevermore. We've grown up in America, and even you have, where it's always been opportunity, right? The the worst kid with a little bit of luck could just knock the ball off the field, right? Including my my launder who came here from China, met him in China initially. And he was one of the people who came down from the mountain to the complex bar, the social revolution. And he now has two girls that have both graduated from NYU, right? So that's going to become increasingly more difficult to have that type of economic and social mobility. So now preserving wealth, which was before kind of, all right, I'll buy you that condo over there and I'll give it to my kid, has changed considerably, because now it's not just about preserving wealth, but it requires kind of a real tactical I'll go back to tactical. It requires a very, very disciplined approach to their own financial investments and what they're trying to accomplish.
And so, like, part of this is why I enjoy talking to you so much is like you've just thought about many different disciplines very deeply.
Yeah.
You were telling me before we started recording that these are not just fly by night thoughts that kind of come in and out of your head,
Yeah.
but you've been writing a lot of stuff down as well. Maybe talk to us just kind of from a high level of like, why are you spending so much time right now in kind of the midst of all this chaos, writing so much in kind of like a daily log, or really kind of just putting these ideas and thoughts down onto paper?
Yeah. So it's interesting because in 2012, when all my companies went public, I was massively depressed. I mean, just clinically off the charts depressed. And vacations didn't resolve that, and just things wouldn't resolve that, and my friends couldn't resolve that. It was just, you work 20 hours a day. It's been your entire life, and your compensation, a lot of it has been on the back end. And now, you've cashed everything. Basically, in 1 year, I cashed ridiculous amounts. So I was massively depressed. So I read Seneca's on Shortness of Life, and I read his letters to Lucilius. And for me, it was like my own father speaking to me. So I learned the concept of time, right? Which is something I never thought about before, but the equity of time and how to observe time, not just by your kids growing older and getting married, but in terms of, in order for you to observe time, requires its own discipline. So I started keeping a daily log. In fact, I've got it right there. And it has everything in it. It's got what time I woke up, what time I went to sleep, how long did I stay in bed for, did I meditate, how many times did I meditate, did I deceive myself, did I deceive others? Because deception is a very important thing. Did I talk too much? Did I listen? These are things that there has to be an awareness of it that I never realized until I wanted to find some type of a dedication. So I had already had an appreciation for logs, right? I kept them every day. And when COVID happened, I saw, this is another one of my theories, but I saw that the world was changing so quickly and so violently that the mind could not comprehend it. You think you can, you think you remember things from COVID, you don't. I've kept a detailed log that right now is about 10 hours a day. And I've now enlisted other people to help me out. But it is extremely detailed. And are you interested in why I did this with COVID?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, George Soros who gets a bad rap. People should really read him, some of his stuff. And I've been lucky to know him and his own philanthropy and the open source institutes. oligarchs are complex things, right? And so he has a theory of reflexivity, which is brilliant. And I learned about it in 2012 when I was trying to figure out my own investment kind of thesis. Um, and I needed a better vocabulary for it and a better way of thinking about it. And the PDF of it is adequate. It's a little bit kind of tedious, but the videos on YouTube were incredible. And what he talked about was positive and negative feedback loops. And he actually used the instance of social media and news. So he was talking about it even in the current environment about how media can and will lie to you, and the tools that it uses and why, and the behavioral sciences and how it can be observed or not be observed, and how to look at it as a disembodied intellect. So that's what I wanted to do, because I knew that we were seeing the fastest roll up of power in human history. But I also saw media was so he's got this theory that in behavioral sciences that the mind can only hold actively about 6 thoughts at a time. And what the media does is they can continually will bombard you with information. They'll completely bombard you with thoughts, so that these thoughts are all you have in the front of your mind, right? That's all you've got. So all that matters is that they overwhelm those thoughts. It doesn't matter if yesterday's thought was a lie, because it doesn't exist there anymore. Today's thoughts exist there. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
So I wanted to observe COVID in the way that they were lying about it, because I knew just rationally, everybody, human being. Well, I saw some of your podcasts of 3 months ago. Some of your guests were persuaded by it. I never was. And I tried to share that with people on Twitter, actually, because I never was, and I just couldn't find a few people that were sympathetic to fight that battle. So I kept a log because people weren't, and I wanted to observe the way the media was creating this, because it's no longer this Noam Chomsky type of effect with manufacturing consent. I mean, that is primitive. You're talking about Mesolithic. Here you're talking about where there's only 5 media corporations, and there's only essentially 3 pipe providers like Google or Verizon or whatever it is, however it gets through the pipes. And there's only a couple of, ESPNs and Disney's, and that in fact is a media corporation. So how those 5 corporations were just bullshitting everybody. They wanted to lock everybody up. And then why they wanted to lock everybody up. And I was just watching everything. And I'll give you an example of that. A month ago, everything that you were seeing on TV was images of the Great Recession and the Great Depression. And they showed long lines and food banks. Let me tell you, I do a lot with philanthropy. And I do a lot with workforce development. It's what my wife is doing right now, actually. A lot. I don't mean a little bit. I don't mean to embellish it. A lot. Well, my wife is particular. She doesn't watch TV. There you go. She's not on social media. I mean, she's actually helping people. So I knew that the job market was still good, and that actually people still freaking loved America, right? They weren't persuaded by this. They knew that media was lying to them. So I kept a log of all of it. I kept a log of chloroquine. I kept a log of Tom Hanks. Do you know anything about Tom Hanks?
Well, I know that he was one of the first celebrities to actually be confirmed to have coronavirus, and he's so loved that I think people really were kind of like, "Whoa, shit! This might be actually something to pay attention to if Tom Hanks has it."
Okay, so let me interrogate you a little bit, because I'm fascinated by this. Was he confirmed to have COVID? I don't recall. I don't recall.
Yeah, so he, him, and I believe it's Rita is his wife, right? They supposedly both were confirmed to have COVID, and they were, I want to say, in Australia, but don't hold me to that. They were somewhere and took a test and were confirmed, and then basically 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, whatever, came out and said, "Hey, we've survived this," which again is. To your point, I think when a celebrity or somebody who is well known, it was like the NBA players, right? Oh my God, NBA players have tested positive. From a mathematical standpoint, there should be no difference in gravity of importance based on what you do in life, how much money you have, or anything like that. When it comes from a qualitative standpoint, the fact that, you know, a rich person or a famous person could get this, I think drives more fear when it comes to something like a virus or things that are just well not understood scientifically.
Okay. So I'm going to interrogate you a little bit. I just want to understand kind of your emotions attached to it. Not whether it's rational enough, but just kind of how your brain kind of synthesizes what's no longer a headline anymore. So I'm going to just ask you a couple of questions.
All right.
Was he confirmed to have it? I mean, did you? I know he revealed that he had it, and perhaps the test being positive is a confirmation. But being a celebrity, I don't think that was persuasively. There was his doctor's report. I mean, wasn't disclosed. I mean, we don't see a stamp on it. How do you think he got COVID? How do you think he got it?
I have no clue.
Okay. Is it because he has a lot of exposure to people and he does a lot of selfies? Because that was kind of the common thinking at that time.
It's definitely possible, right? If I remember correctly, I think that there were stories saying that he was like filming a movie or preparing to film a movie. And the whole logic was, oh, that's because he's running into people all day long and kind of engaging that way. Yeah. But I don't think that they ever came out and said, you know, hey, this is how he got it.
Yeah. So who do you think has more exposure, would have more exposure to COVID? A retail worker, hospitality worker, or Tom Hanks? Who do you think has more exposure to people, more interactions with people? Tom Hanks, the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world, called Tom Hanks, or a retail worker making $15 an hour behind a cash register or a hospitality worker? Who has more exposure?
I'll tell you that throughout the entire thing, every time I went to the grocery store, the cashier at the grocery store, I was in amazement at the same people there every single day, you know, day in, day out, because they had to interact with, you know, hundreds of people, if not more, on a daily basis throughout this entire thing for weeks on end.
But they didn't have it. Okay, but so let me ask you another question. And maybe statistically they did, although statistically it doesn't seem they could have had it. And I think at a time that, what month did Tom Hanks reveal he had tested positive for COVID?
I don't remember, but I think end of March, sometime in there, if I remember correctly.
And then you discussed the NBA. When did the NBA reveal that one of their players had tested positive and had to stop the season?
Yeah, it was early. It was like mid to late March.
Okay, so it was the NBA first and then Tom Hanks, right?
I don't remember, but yeah, it's something like that.
But you remember that both of them, that Tom Hanks had COVID, and you remember that the NBA had a player with COVID. You remember both of those, but not the facts of it, right?
Of course.
That's your fact, right?
Yep.
That's what still is in your mind someplace, and it's just been filed away. It's not something you talk about every day. COVID started, right? The awareness of COVID as pandemic doesn't really have a real definition, but the awareness of the fullness of the threat of COVID started about when? When do you think?
I think in the U.S., no one really took it seriously till March, but I think globally, you know, I remember I got on a flight in January. It was like third week of January, maybe, and I put a mask on. And I was actually just telling someone recently that the warning sign I should have paid attention to but didn't understand that it was a warning sign is when I went to get a mask in New York City. They were out of all the N95 masks at the store. Okay.
So now that was prophylactic of you and wise. And I know, you know, I saw your interview with Balaji, and I know that he was very early advocate of the prophylactic measure. So let me just understand the sequence of events, right? January, you became aware of it, and you said this is going to be a problem. And some of your friends who are better observers of these things, although not academically qualified, but enough on the periphery of being qualified to just make this type of information. And what information do you think they were getting? Were they getting it from videos? Do you think that those videos of people dropping dead in China, do you think that had an influence on people's perception of the death. I mean, you remember those videos too, right?
Oh, I think that and this will be a problem going forward, but specifically was very obvious during the COVID stuff was I remember multiple times, January, February into March and April, saying, look, the data that we are being told, you have to question for, let's say, 3 or 4 different perspectives. And the questioning isn't, I think that it's overinflated or underinflated. It's actually, I don't know, right? Because you can actually make an argument that certain data points are overinflated, certain data points are underinflated. But what ends up happening is it became this, I don't know, just emotional thing where people began to tell themselves stories that they wanted to hear, and they found the data that supported that story,
Okay,
right?
so
And that worked for people in both camps, those for or against it.
so let me provide a little bit of forensics that is absolutely correct. So I'm going to strip the emotions out of it. I'm going to look at it as that disembodied intellect. Right?
Okay.
So I'm going to look at how true actually corresponds to fact and vice versa. And not these 6 thoughts that were in my head then and trying to invoke them now. So the videos of China were coming out in January, and of people dropping dead on social media. Okay, and the way they were quarantining people also started coming out then. The violence of how they were doing it, which was also around the same time as the riots, which I'm sure you remember also. And because I'm so familiar with China, kind of the internals of China, particularly socially, although I don't intrude in it, but I'm very aware of them. I know that there were a lot of riots on the mainland that you didn't see because people weren't getting paid, and because there was a shortage on the dollar, there was a scarcity of the dollar, and a whole bunch of things. There was a lot of riots as creditors could no longer have the capital to continue giving it to debtors because they all had their own dollar-denominated credits. So December, January, and I have this a timeline to the T of everything. I mean, China, the U.S., the media, the who, I can't even tell you how much I've got everything chronicled. So I'm going to bore you with this, but it's kind of interesting. I like kind of interrogating people about this. So the panic began. De Blasio, who's a friend, I've known him for 20 years. So I'm not going to look at him as a person. I'm going to look at the politician. In early March, said everyone go see a movie, right? And he even recommended a movie, The Traitor, which was clearly intended to be a snipe. And at the same time, his health commissioner said, you know, hang out with everybody, have a good time, convene in large place. And Pelosi was saying the same thing. And, you know, they were saying that they were doing it to be anti-racist or whatever, or just, and they called it essentially its consequences, the equivalent of the flu. They didn't call it the flu, but they just kind of, the inference was that, you know, shiz happens, right? So just go out and enjoy life. So March 11th, Imperial Report comes out, right? Neil Ferguson, who has a very checkered past. And March 11th, well, it came out right before that, but let me just begin with March 11th, is Angela Merkel comes out with this speech. It shocked the world. Literally, look up the headlines. It shocked the world. Look up the Guardian, look up anything. And she said something, and I don't have it in front of me, but my recollection was like 200 million people in America were going to become infected, if that was correct. And 2.2 million Americans would die, right? Unless certain measures were taken, but it's going to be devastating. And she called it a war on. She said, Germany hasn't experienced something like this since World War II. It's freaking insane. Whatever she says, do the opposite, okay? Truly. And as an investor, I can tell you, whatever she says, do the opposite. And you'll make a fortune. So March 11th, Angela Merkel comes out with that speech. Was it March 11th or March 12th? As I recall, I'm just going to say March 11th. I could be off. It was all over the newspapers everywhere. It was even the cover of The Intercept, which is allegedly this liberal type of thing, just because sometimes they'll criticize Hillary or something, but whatever. Or sometimes they'll defend Trump or whatever, but I cancel my subscription anyway, but it was their cover. Millions of people were going to die, blah, blah, blah. Oligarchs like people locked up, just so you know. So, at least when they're not working, they like to mark up, right? Consuming and locking. But so on that same day, Tom Hanks announced he had coronavirus. I think in Australia there were like at that time, and again I don't have this right in front of me, but there was like 4 people with coronavirus in all of Australia. Him and Rita were 2 of them. It's insane. That same day, the NBA went through what they, made their, revelation. So I believe it was within that 24-hour. And again, this is all chronicled within this, and I have a rigid timeline. It's incredible timeline for this. But Tom Hanks is one of the most recognizable people in humanity. Right? I mean, he's no Tom Cruise, but Tom Hanks is, he is who he is, right? He's an A+, and Cruise is, filming a movie in space. Amazing. So, and the NBA is ESPN and Disney, so it's a well-recognized brand, right? Around the world, everybody knows what the NBA is. Everybody knows who Shaq is. And hopefully Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but I think they've lost him in history. So that's a lot of media exposure all at once, right? I mean, that kind of bombards your head, right? Do you think that those 6 thoughts became 1,000 thoughts and 6 of them were in your head? Of course. So with that said, the next time we heard of Hanks was when in April, and I forget the date. I think it was May 24th. No, it was April 24th or whatever it was. I was just looking at it yesterday. I think it was April 24th. You remember all the headlines against chloroquine, right? And it was a very heavy concentration. It was about a 2-week period. And it was everywhere. Would you agree with that? So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So going back to my theories of things, it was filling up those 6 thoughts, right? Rita Wilson announces that she endured chloroquine, and it was horrible, and it was like one of the worst experiences she's ever had in life. She's not even sure if it did any good. Some guy, most likely poisoned, who knows, drinks fish tank something because Trump said this, so it also stay in your head. So the imagery that's going on in your brain. So I'm keeping this COVID blog because all of this has to be remembered. Historians are not going to remember any of this. Journalists will never write of what we're experiencing now. And if they do, it's the tiniest sliver of it. They're never going to write a system view. And journalism, which has been a love of my life and my mentors really created it, is never going to recover in the way that you grew up. You grew up with a Dan Rather who at least had some appearance of impartiality and authority. That's gone. That's never coming back. So I had to be that guy. So I had already had this for my own daily log, which takes me about half an hour a day. And I still have the one that from when you and I had coffee, and I remember using bad language. And I was just about to go to India, and I never use bad language. I never use it. So, but I was saying horrible words a lot. So as soon as I was doing it that night around 11 o'clock, I was like, it was a form of delusion. Why would you use bad language? I mean, it's just another way of it manifesting itself. But why was I using such bad language? How much self-awareness did I lose that I was using the language that I've used very infrequently? But I recall using that, so I remember writing that down. I was like, why did I do this? How was my listening? Which actually was pretty good. But you like other people talking. So that's why I have my COVID blog.
And it feels to me like documenting it has value. Do you think that you'll go back and read it 6 months from now, a year from now? Like what's the value in the future of doing it now?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing it right now for me, right? But I'm also including it a science fiction story. And because so much information, right? Just like those 6 thoughts that Soros was talking about in his theory, the behavioral scientists, I have a lot of those 6 thoughts in my piece. I mean, just the timeline for China is about 40 slides, timeline for the US, timeline for WHO, the story about Neil Ferguson. Each of them are very overwhelming, right? They're going to inundate those 6 thoughts. And people already have their other competing 6 thoughts, right? So I include a lot of humor because I'm actually kind of a funny guy. But at the same time, I'm writing a science fiction story. And it's done in a way that relaxes the mind. So now you've got those 6 thoughts in your mind, and mine are competing for what's seeing input in your brain, but I'm also trying to give you some relief. So you've got all these negative feedback loops. I'm trying to let your mind restore some type of an equilibrium with this really interesting, just absurd, fascinating science fiction story that is awesome. And it's not literature. It's kind of a junky beach novel that's only maybe going to be 5,000 words. It's amazing. And it's just this amazing narrative that adds to the thing. It's amazing. It's about Superman, by the way, but he's never Superman. He's Clark Kent and whatever.
But do you want to publish this as a book, or is this something that's just for you as a creative exercise?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know. It's become such an obsession for me because we're just it's the fastest roll-up of power in history. And there's a lot of politics going on, and there's a lot of protests, and there's a lot of reason for that is involved in that. There's a lot of tearing down statues and losing Butterfly McQueen and just losing everything that made my life so special. I mean, just everything that made my life so special. Nancy lost a big chunk of her family at that time, half of the Polish family, to the Nazis. And you're losing that history because Christopher Columbus brought Jews over from Spain because there was a requirement of conversion. And he himself was likely Jewish. And it's just, so to tear down those statues is not being done by the victims of the oppressor, right? It's being done by the oppressor. And once that history is gone, America will never be able to restore itself because these little idiots in like Seattle doing these things, they know memes of socialism, and there's some weblog that they read and whatever else that are just idiotic. I mean, I've read it's unrecognizable, unrecognizable to anything that's politically coherent. So they have no intellectual ability, nor the historical record needed to build any type of an operable, what I call a people operating system. So what instead happens is we have these mega corporations that, again, have gone from kind of a territorial sovereignty to a functional one, where we've exchanged the Constitution for terms of service. And we've seen now with Black Lives Matter, where everywhere you look, it's that. And whether the cause is virtuous or not is a political, partisan type of thing. And just, I don't really get into these type of things. But it's a lot of white kids. And these white kids work for Facebook. They're the phalanx for Facebook. And so Facebook is taking over. Google is taking over. Amazon is taking over. Whatever was left, whatever artifacts was left of retail stores and of cash transactions and everything else is being taken away. And I wanted to document this. So I might turn it into a movie. I don't know. I wonder. I mean, I might turn it into a movie. I might just fund some guys. And there's a lot of, people who are qualified to do it. Or I might just turn it into a graphic novel.
I love it.
I'm going to self-fund it, whatever it is. And I've known a lot of movie producers, independent movie producers. I'm going to self-fund it. I don't want a nickel from anybody, ever.
I love it. I love it. Before I wrap up, I always ask the same 2 questions to everyone. First one is, what is the most important book you've ever read?
Oh, that's easy. Actually, it's a choice now between, I'm going to actually say Seneca Letters to Lucilius, because I didn't have those lessons growing up. I didn't have them. And that was how I acquired all that wisdom and fatherly advice. And it's also stuck with me because of the rhetoric. It was such an amazing rhetorician. Have you read it?
I have not, no.
Oh,
Worth it?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say one of the other authors within that vein is Epictetus. Have you ever read Epictetus?
I have not.
Tell every young person you know to read Seneca,
Hmm.
uh, without needing to adopt Stoicism, right? But just read this and read Epictetus, because if somebody as a youth had given me Epictetus, my life would have been, my corporate life would have been much different, because the world was so violent back then. It was about how to stay alive in very violent times. So in a corporate environment, although you're not going to be killed, if you want to succeed, it requires that same type of diplomacy and awareness and how to communicate things and how to respect hierarchies and organizational charts. Just remarkable lessons, because back then, Caesar would kill you on a whim, or a senator would kill you on a whim, literally on a whim. If they wanted your property and you weren't in their favor, they would kill you. And they had their own militias. So it was difficult to stay alive. And it required effort to stay alive. So I would say, so those two. Okay, I'm
I,
a long-winded answer. I apologize.
I love it. What do you think about aliens? Believer or non-believer?
Uh, what do you mean by aliens?
You tell me how you define it.
Well, I think of a life on another planet. Is that
That's a
is
fair
that?
definition. You think that exists?
Of course, it has to exist. I think we're going to encounter it much sooner than people think. But
What does that timeline look like?
I think it's going to present problems for humanity, because they're going to be smarter than us. When we encounter them, they're going to be much smarter than us. Their reality is going to be much different than ours in a way that we can't comprehend. So, I read science fiction books and I like them about like teleportation and all this type of stuff, but that's the human experience, which is kind of in its own way idiotic. Because even with Space Force and humanity will be living in space by 2030 and then 2060, hotels in space, hundreds of thousands of people by 2060, it's still going to be the human experience. It's still going to be your experiences in space. And although those experiences are going to change with each generation and whatever occurs, it's the mind can only comprehend so much. We're very imperfect things, and our AI is built upon humans, right? We're talking about something just incomprehensibly more advanced in terms of its intelligence than ours, that there's no way for a human mind to comprehend it. So hopefully our interactions will be sweet. Hopefully they'll be kind to us. I think they'll meet us before we meet them, but they're not going to come here to take our dilithium crystals. I mean, or to eat us.
I tend to think that you're probably more right than not. What you could ask me one question to wrap up. What's the one question you have?
Can I ask you two questions?
Sure.
What is your favorite book? What book? No, excuse me. Let me take that book. What book do you feel has had the most influence in you as you read it and affected you, and has sustained you?
So I'm cheating because I've thought a lot about this, obviously, when I asked the question. There was 3 books that I read simultaneously, or sequentially, at the age of 20 years old, while I was deployed to Iraq. So I had a lot of time to kind of sit around, read, think, all that kind of stuff. And I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Richest Man in Babylon, and Think and Grow Rich. And the reason why I think those 3 books kind of together at that time in life was it changed the way I thought, right? It kind of was a reprogramming, if you will, just about here is how work and money and kind of all these things in life that's very opposite, I think, to kind of the traditional education. And so if you read it too early, you're almost not mature enough to kind of take it seriously. If I would have read it too late in life, I probably would have kind of been set in my ways. And so it was one of these kind of serendipitous things of those 3 books together at that point in life, like set me in probably a different direction than I would have gone. So I think that's probably it, not even close compared to anything else.
That's very interesting. Now, particularly Think and Grow Rich, did this give you a perspective and a rationale, not just a perspective, but a complete kind of system of thought, right? So that's what it is, that you feel you lacked? Did your parents give that to you? I mean, had you had any slivers of that before? Did you have any system view of that before?
I think that my parents definitely never like sat me or my brothers down and were like, let us teach you something. The one thing that now being older, having the kind of wherewithal to have the conversation with my parents about like, hey, why did you do certain things when we were growing up? My father was adamant about not giving us an allowance. And I remember, us as kids being like, hey, every kid I know's got an allowance. Like basically you're cheating us out of our God-given right to, have $20 to go to the movies. Right.
Yeah,
And what he would say to us is, if you want money, I'm happy to give you money, but come ask me and I will tell you what you need to do in order to earn the money. And so for us, it was just, dad being an asshole basically. Right. And trying to give us be difficult. But really what he was teaching us was, look, if you want $20 to go to the movie theater, go outside and rake the leaves. Right. And kind of just instilling in us this almost subconscious manner of like, if you do work, you can earn money. And so I think that like after reading those books, it was one of these things where like you started to connect some dots that maybe weren't as obvious beforehand. And then after the fact, being able to have the conversation and him being like, yeah, like, look, I know you guys thought I was just being difficult, but like, I put a little bit of thought into it, right? I wasn't, completely flying at the edge of my seat there. So I don't think it was kind of formal education. I think it was more of, trying to get ideas into, for him, 5 sons who pretty hard headed. You can't really sit them down in the classroom style. You got to kind of do it in other ways.
That was question number 1.
Okay.
Even though there was a follow to that, it was like a 1.
All right. What's number 2?
1A. So number 2, I wasn't actually anticipating asking. I don't think I've asked it with people before, but I'm very intrigued. And maybe it's because I'm also wondering about it myself. But if you were to shut your eyes now, you have an awareness that I'm going to watch you. And whoever's watching this is watching you. Right? So I'm going to ask you 2 questions. But
okay.
When you shut your eyes, your mind is going to travel a little bit in time. You're going to remember, I have to do this today. I've got to do that.
Yep.
Relax a little bit so we can quickly get beyond that point, because I want to be respectful of your time. So relax your mind as quickly as you can, and you're going to time travel a little bit. And you're going to think about chores that have to happen. But what I'm very interested in is what your own identity is. So I ask yourself when your eyes are shut, I am a person who, and then fill in that. And then as that's your own identity, right? And then I'm also very interested in how you want others to perceive you. So while your eyes are shut and everyone's watching you, right? Yep. You're kind of vulnerable. How do you want Adam and everybody else who is seeing you and is vulnerable, how do you want us? What is your identity? So I think of myself, I am the type of person who, right? So let's use that
yep.
as an identity. And let me just clarify with that. And then while you're within that relaxed, hopefully quick state of mind, is I want people to think of me as a person who.
Yep. So I've probably thought about this more than most people under the guise of, I think one of the greatest vulnerabilities and actual weaknesses of American society and just more generally globally is most people answer that question with some adjective or some occupation, right? And I've said it publicly before, but I actually think one of the greatest advantages in life is to attach your identity to your own name. And what I mean by that is, let's take corporate America, right? So if you work in corporate America, most people will say when they meet you, right, they will very quickly in the conversation explain where they work or what their role is, right? And that is something that gives them a point of pride. It's a point that gives them identity. It's a point that gives them something to kind of hang their hat on, right? And it gives them importance in a conversation. If you then go to other types of occupations, it might be less likely that they attach identity to the workplace or the title in terms of like the actual, I'm a managing director or I'm a, manager or whatever, but it is the job that they do. So you may get somebody who says, I'm a entrepreneur, or I'm a, banker, or whatever the occupation is, not necessarily tied to the location. I tend to think that the people who I find most gratifying spending time with in life, and I think kind of have the best advantage, is the people who say, my name is Anthony Pompliano. And that's it, right? That is the identity, is it's their name. And the reason why I think that is because you can strip away everything else, but you can't take away them, right? Them as an individual, as their name, et cetera. And so it kind of is this weird thing where your whole life, you're conditioned to care about and put importance on all of those adjectives, all those occupations and roles and all this kind of stuff. But if you're able to eventually get to the point where you can say, I'm actually just comfortable being me without any of that, there's this element of, it's kind of like an FU mental state, right? Of just being able to say, like, I actually don't care what you think about what job I do or anything else. It's just like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. One, I think that's very freeing for a lot of people. But also two is the type of people who, at least who I personally want to spend time with, there's a huge amount of respect that comes with that, right? They really kind of value other people that have the ability to think kind of independently, who are comfortable in their own skin, all of those types of attributes. And so, like, to me, it's, if we could get more people at least trending in that direction, we actually would be a much more resilient, kind of respectful society to some degree. Instead, what I think ends up happening is people, you see it at a party, right? Some kind of social event. People show up and it's like, I've got this person who's a managing director at X company who's now talking to associate at Y company. And immediately there's some hierarchical, kind of understanding among two humans that to me is just kind of, I don't know, it's just a false god that everyone's kind of listening to some degree. So I think that's like the most powerful position to be in, is just to be able to, when you close your eyes and say, I am whatever, it's just your name. That's it. And it's just, okay. I am me.
That's very interesting. And I won't inquire about that too much, other than to now ask you, how would you like others to see? Because there has to be some type of attributes. I mean, I don't expect anybody to shorthand my identity as perhaps I don't expect them to, as a particularly I don't know, whatever is bad, but how do you want others to what attributes and identity do you want others? Because certainly if I can't just think of you as that, I'm going to give, like, my identity that I assign to you is kind of, and I remember saying this over coffee, you're a very good interviewer. You're a very good listener. So I would say, one of the things I would say is he's a good listener. The other thing I would say is an absence of airs. Right? I don't feel like within our conversation, within the other podcast, you've tried to convey kind of some credential or authority that competes with anybody else. I've noticed that within your interview. So I would say that. So I would say that he's a good listener and that he has that kind of humbleness.
Mine's much simpler. Ready? It's just happy. To me, it's that simple. If the day I die, everyone goes, man, that dude really enjoyed life, he was happy, I win, right?
So you want others. So now when you're thinking of your own identity, now you're not just thinking of your own name, but you're also giving that some attributes, right? Like you're carrying that with you. You've got some awareness that you're happy, right? So it's kind of the self-affirmation thing. I didn't have that as a kid. Man. You are awesome. But so you're thinking my name and then happiness. And
well, because here's why, right? Is when you go through this exercise, I would, and I'm kind of thinking of this off the top of my head, but I would put people in two buckets. Either they want people to think of descriptions of themselves that end up being very kind of self-grandizing, right? Of like, I am important, I am smart, I am, whatever you want to put in that bucket. The reason why I immediately gravitate to the word happy is because to me, if you and I hang out and you walk away always saying that guy's happy, you actually in some way get value out of that, right? Because you're much more likely to struggle, to be sad, depressed, angry, mad, all of these negative connotation states if you're hanging out with people who are happy, right? And so it's kind of one of these things where ultimately all I can control is myself. And if I'm personally happy, then like that's all I care about. But by the way, by being in that state, you hanging out with me, talking to me, whatever, it's more likely that you're going to, be happy, be content, be these other things that are positive rather than go into the negative.
Can I ask you a question 2.B?
Okay.
Because I'm so interested.
Yeah.
It's very remarkable. I've watched a lot. And having, as we've lost Charlie Rose, there's been really nothing to fill that void. And now we're finally beginning to see some people who can have long form, that can be super smart. Like Charlie Rose is a smart guy. I used to see him every day for breakfast. I used to see him in my restaurant. Super smart, but never smarter than his guest. So I think that's always really, really interesting. So actually, I'm not going to ask you the other. So instead of asking you 2.2, I just want to understand that when you're doing all these videos, and you've had some remarkable, truly remarkable, even the bears, the financial bears, I completely disagree with. And the pandemic people I definitely disagreed with. Really remarkable interview. You're very humble and clearly all that. And that has to be a hobby for you also. It can't just be, and you do your letter, which I read all the time, I get an email. So clearly you're happy, but that has to be some part of your identity. So how is that fused into how you think of yourself? Because that's so much effort that it's got to be some part of. And how do you want others to perceive you? Do you want me to think of you as a happy person, but also a remarkable worker who also has a tremendous amount of discretionary effort, and a happy person?
Yeah, I think it's it all is intertwined, right? It's hard to segment each thing, and I've said it before that the interviews is probably the most selfish thing I do, and the reason why I say that is I get to talk to super interesting people that
awesome.
I am the arbiter of who gets to come on, right? I'm the final selection committee, right? Of, okay, I want to talk to this person. I don't want to talk to this person.
Yeah.
And so like that in itself is some filtering mechanism of like, I'm willing to invest my time to talk to this person. And then during that conversation, I get to ask the questions that I want the answers to. So like, it's the ultimate learning experience for me. And I think that people they sitting there like, oh my God, like I get to listen to this. This is so awesome. Thank you so much for doing this, whatever. And I always kind of like chuckle to myself, right? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is such a benefit to me because many of these people, I would doubt that they would talk to me if it wasn't going to be recorded, right? Or they wouldn't at least go into such depth and spend so much time. And so it's almost as if the audience is a tool in some case for me to be able to learn. And so I always want to turn those people and be like, no, you're mistaken here. Like the power dynamic is like, I should be thanking you for listening because you're the reason why I get to talk to these people.
Okay, so there's a question 1.3.
Okay.
And I apologize for interrupting you.
Go ahead.
So I'm really interested in your own identity. And I'm asking the questions because it's also a challenge. It's a human challenge, right? It's something we all go through. And if we don't go through it, it's probably the tragedy of having lived a life without that type of awareness. So I just want to understand your own identity. You say your name, which is remarkable. And now within saying your name and that positive affirmation, right, is happy, right? So you're happy. You're a hard worker, right? This is all discretionary effort. It's discretionary effort. Is that fair to say there's discretionary effort?
I think so.
Okay, so happy, hard worker, right? Discretionary effort's hard work in itself. And intellectually inquisitive.
Of course. I think that that's, I don't know. I find people who aren't intellectually curious about things kind of boring, right? I mean, personally, and sure,
Or,
there's people who are happy not being intellectually curious, but I think that's just my general nature. And so I found a way to kind of get to do that every day, which, you know, frankly is like, it's like a cheat code for life in some ways.
and I suppose you would want, and it's not even a question now, but I would suppose, maybe it's 1.4, but I would suppose, or 2.4, I would suppose that's also how you want other people, I mean, if you, to perceive you, right? As, you know, you're happy, which you clearly are. I mean, it certainly emanates when you carry that as a halo. So then hard worker, right? If anybody sees your body of work, you're going to say this is a guy that's got a lot of discretionary effort. He could push a hot dog cart, and in 20 years, he'd have 20 of them being pushed down the street. Right? And it's just reality. 3 is this kind of intellectual curiosity. So because you do so much of this, do you feel that you want other people to say, this is who he is, this is his identity?
I think that's part of the magic is like, because I'm comfortable whether people see the intellectual curiosity, the happiness, all that stuff or not. It's kind of one of these things where as I've gotten, I think I've been able to shed any identity outside of just my name. You then realize that all of those other adjectives, look, I'm human, right? When people say nice things about you, you're like, oh, that's great that they think that about me. Even if you sometimes question it yourself. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't bother me either way, right? And I think that's also part of, look, one of the positive parts of social media that doesn't get credit because everyone always looks through the negative perspective is all the vitriol, all the negative comments, and just the deep, dark, nasty part of social media. For people that have the large followings and are very public and things like that, actually they've developed incredibly thick skin, right? Like you'd be hard pressed to say something that would, you know, really kind of hurt me. I've read it all. I've seen it all. I've heard it all. And most people, if they've kind of gone through that gauntlet of public kind of openness and vulnerability on the social platforms, then it kind of almost backs into this question of like, at some point you're just like, I literally don't care. Right. And I don't know if that's healthy or not, good or bad, but like when you're at that position, it's just, there's this element of like, it's very freeing. Right. And I don't know. It makes me
Okay, so
happy.
2.5. I
All
really
right.
apologize.
Go ahead.
I'm intellectually inquisitive also.
I know you are.
And part of my identity is that I drive people crazy because I'm so intellectually inquisitive. And unfortunately, I don't have that same social intelligence that you have. So mine can be not upsetting to people because, you know, it's obviously in humanity and sharing humanity. But my phraseologies can sometimes, and the way I express it can sometimes be a little bit, you know, agitating. Not, but upset. Yeah, neither. But, you know, it can come off wrong. So actually, I won't ask. I've asked you enough. I mean,
come on, you're here. You might as well ask.
Well, I don't want to interrogate you too much, but my question was, so it's 2.5, which is probably 2.9, is how do you observe, you know, a person can't carry self-awareness. A person is going to deviate from, you know, what they would like to be, right? I call it delusions, but I'm sure you've got your own type of language for it. How do you observe that in real time? And how do you correct it? How do you remedy it? So both in being happy because it's so easy, violent my lovers, but in being happy because that takes effort, right? And how you view yourself, and then in making sure that when you're expressing that happiness, so that it's a part of you. So how do you observe in yourself? How do you carry that awareness that you've now shared with me, so you can also correct it when it's not there?
So I think that this is probably the only way I know, because this is my personal experience, And the people that I've spent a lot of time with have all gotten to the same point through a similar path, which is exposure to the extremes, right? And what I mean by that is, so take my life, for example, one of the best, probably the number one best experience I ever had in my life was going to war. Because what it did is when I came back, it was very cut and dry on an extreme level of, is this thing going to potentially lead to death or is it not? And that is such an extreme kind of measurement framework, right? Because most people, they worry more about, is this something that makes me upset or not? Is this something that, makes me happy or not? Is this something that's going to bother me a day from now or just right now? Like those are the measurement tools they use. When you then extend your measurement tool out to the absolute extreme of the spectrum, you say, am I going to die from this or not? All of a sudden, there's a big gap between the answers yes and everything else. And so therefore, you kind of get recentered very quickly on, it's not going to kill me. Like, I don't need to worry about it, right? And your life almost becomes simpler and easier because you realize that extreme worry or that line almost, that's where what I think a normal person who hasn't been exposed to those extreme situations, like they worry about that stuff way earlier in the life cycle of, or the spectrum of kind of where things fall. For me, I mean, I've literally been with friends and something happens and they could, literally look like they're about to jump off a cliff, right? I mean, they're just worked up to the absolute extreme and I'm sitting there and I couldn't care less, right? Because I just, hey, let's just calm down and move on, right? You're not even going to remember this in 24 hours, let alone, be worried about it. I don't think you can have that self-awareness by reading a book. I don't think you can do it by, sitting and thinking about it. I literally think you've got to be put in situations. And so, we didn't talk about it, but obviously I've done a lot of kind of extreme sports and athleticism type events. And same thing there. Like, you can read all the books you want about, you want to go run a marathon or 100-mile race or whatever. At some point, you just got to go do the extreme shit in order to be physically prepared. But I think mentally is the same thing, right? You got to be put in the extreme situations so that you can almost condition your mind to, okay, well, I know I can handle this thing that's so far out there. Everything else is, it's a cakewalk. So I think that's probably the number one thing that helped me personally. I just don't know how, and people have asked me before, I don't know how to recreate that, right? How do you take an average person who's not in the military, who's never going to go face war, and recreate the mental conditions that almost like harden them? I think you see some of these guys like the David Goggins of the world and these Navy SEALs and stuff who are saying, hey, go do one hard thing every day. And that type of perspective, yeah, it chips away at it and it kind of puts you in the right direction. Something different about a bomb going off, right? Than hey, I went and I did 100 burpees today. Like it's just a little bit, I think, of a watered down version, but at least it's a better step in the right direction than something else.
How frequent, 2.8.
Go ahead.
How frequently do you feel you're able to practice that as part of your daily life or weekly life? I have my own things and I really appreciated yours. It's really remarkable. I have things that I have found are helpful for, kind of restoring myself a little bit and restoring my self-awareness. And I try and do it as frequently as I can. Part of my note-taking is part of that. How do you practice this daily?
So in some weird world, I don't think that I practice it in the sense of I'm very bad about I don't meditate. I don't sit and kind of do like a daily log like you do. Like there's no kind of one activity that I can point to and say like that is part of this. And the only reason why I'm even aware of this is over time, enough people have pointed it out to me where they've been in the same situation as I have. And they say, why did you not freak out? Or why did you not worry? And I did. And so again, it's really weird in that I think there's two paths to get to the same finish line. One is you can have the persistent daily or weekly type check-ins that kind of keep you very much calibrated down that path, or you can have one incredibly or a small number of incredibly extreme experiences. And what ends up happening is the person who gets calibrated, let's say every day, right, whether it's meditating, writing, or whatever, there's very little kind of waning from that center line, if you will, right? The variable is very small because every day they get the recalibration. The other person actually has a lot more variation in kind of their, we'll call it mental fortitude or, whatever it is. But the thing is that they already had such an extreme experience that the error for margin is so wide that even with all that variation that they have, it all falls within the error of margin, and therefore kind of that they're able to keep going in the right direction. And so to me, the ultimate thing would be somebody who early in their life can have their really extreme experiences and also incorporate the daily or more frequent kind of calibrations. And so it's like, from my standpoint, I see people like yourself who can sit and have those daily calibrations. They're like, man, I'm envious of being able to do that because I just don't do it. Right now I have the benefit of falling back on these extreme experiences. And so I think the kind of holy grail in all this is if you can combine those two things, you just can't get shaken out of kind of this mental solitude, if you will, or kind of state of happiness.
2.9.
All right, let's go.
When was the last time you did an extreme sport activity?
I don't know. Like, it depends on how you define extreme, obviously, right?
How would you define it? I mean, yeah. I'm not asking if you're Conor McGregor or.
Yeah. I would say probably the last thing I did, I ran the original marathon with my girlfriend at the time, now my fiance.
That was question number 3. Who is that girl?
Yeah, Polina is. So she knows me well enough to know that the odds of me ever running a marathon were close to 0, unless if I went and ran the original marathon. Every time somebody, my brothers or a friend said, "Oh, I ran a marathon," I would then be able to say back to them, "Yeah, but you didn't run the original." Just that alone would get me to go do the original, and so. I don't know. I flew on a red-eye flight from Seattle, Washington to Greece, and then ran it, a couple hours after landing. And it was one of these things where, like, I don't care how athletic you are, just it sucks. You're running 26, plus miles. And then when you get done, you're like, man, that was awesome, right? Like I actually felt kind of relieved and the endorphins and all that stuff. But you're like, I'm good. I don't need to go do one of these tomorrow, right? And so I think stuff like that, maybe that's kind of a calibration, but those are super infrequent, at least for me.
So question 3.
All right.
Who is that woman that joins you on those shorter, I think they're daily casts that you do?
Yeah.
Is that your fiance?
Yeah. She is somebody who, if I had to kind of put it into a framework, she had her own like extreme experiences, very different, but I think there's correlations in terms of every immigrant literally gets uprooted from their home country. They move to the United States. They got to learn a new language. They got to go through all Bulgaria.
Ah, that's awesome. My daughter-in-law is from Moldova.
Okay. Yeah. So like you just get this new experience in life, right? And it doesn't have to be that you moved from another country. You could also kind of move around a lot as a kid or whatever, but like those types of extreme experiences put you in a position, I think, where you just have a kind of built-in, the best way I've heard somebody describe it is like mental toughness is a muscle. If you don't exercise the muscle, it like succumbs to hypertrophy, right? And that's essentially what ends up happening. So I don't know.
Okay, so 3.1.
All right.
And this is the old Jewish guy in me, right? Are you guys going to have children? And if so, when? And if when, how many?
All great questions. I have no clue. I think that we would like to have children at some point in the future, but no immediate plans.
Does she agree with that?
Yes. I think it's a thing where like that's one of the things. If you're going to get married, you probably should have that conversation before you get married, rather than wait till later, right?
How long have you known her for?
Almost 4 years.
And when did you guys get engaged?
Last year.
And did you know immediately upon meeting her? Well, first, did you come off of a long relationship before, or what was your experience in kind of the
Nope.
dating market before?
I knew the day I met her.
Oh, good.
Literally said it to her, I think, within the first 24 hours.
Was she in agreement?
It took probably a little bit more convincing than me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for allowing me to do my inquisitive thing upon you.
Of course, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Where can people find you on the internet? Where can we send them?
I linger everywhere. I'm certainly on Twitter, and I try and break free of it, which I did for like a week. I was really good, but then I felt that I was losing so much information flow from COVID, because the only quality information that's still kind of circulating and available is happening on Twitter. Facebook has become garbage. I think Cernovich recently observed that Twitter is the most freest of the social media platforms. And if he says it, take it to the bank. And I have, there is a lot of good information flowing on Twitter. So I went back both to persuade people to buy Boeing, right? Because the market was down and I really wanted people to, benefit, right? It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And, Boeing was at 100, 120, 130, and I was DMing people. I was like, if you have kids, and Facebook, if you're, and Lockheed also. But it's such good quality information. I mean, there's so many doctors on it, so many professionals, and so many people sharing something that they found in like this off type of place. And a lot of them are specialists that are able to give it not just a tweet and a link, but some type of perspective. And that's really helpful to me in my log.
I love it.
Yeah. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time and for allowing me to,
I could talk to you all day long. We will definitely link to your Twitter. I highly suggest people go follow you on Twitter too.
It doesn't matter. I can piss a lot of people off there also. So.
All right, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.